The world leaders are gathering in the Azeri capital of Baku as the UN-led COP29 talks begin today.
Observers have raised doubts over Azerbaijan's role as the host, as fossil fuels make up 90% of the country's exports.
The spotlight this year is likely to be on climate finance. Participants are seeking to commit to a new target for richer nations to help emerging economies cut emissions and cope with climate impacts.
But the prospects of a strong outcome from the Baku summit may appear dim with a second Trump presidency on the horizon. The U.S. president-elect has dismissed climate change on multiple occasions, and experts now believe Washington is about to shift away from the focus on implementing climate agreements.
But for more insight, we'll speak now with Mark Howden, director of the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions at the Australian National University. Professor, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Just wondering, how optimistic are you that COP29 can realistically secure meaningful progress on global climate goals, given it's being held again in a petrostate with many world leaders dropping out over political spats and lost confidence?
Good morning, Julie. Look, I think it is a challenge, and there's always some moderation of expectations at this Conference of the Parties in Baku, partly because it's a petrostate and its interests lie in continued production of oil and gas particularly, and also because, as you've said, there's many other disruptive factors, including what's happened in the US, war in Ukraine and disruption in the Middle East, etc. And so I think that sort of probably small wins will be seen as success for this COP, which is a bit unfortunate given the rate of climate change we're seeing.
Professor, this year's COP is being billed by many as the finance COP. Some say that there might be talk potentially about setting new goals for climate financing. Also, a lot of questions around the role of private sector dollars. So how do you expect conversations to unfold when it comes to the money?
Well, thanks, Teresa. That's a key question for this COP. It's, as you say, it's been billed as the finance COP, and the monies that are intended to be flow from this are to really redress the challenges that we've seen since the COP in Copenhagen in 2009, where developed countries said they'd contribute about $100 billion a year to adaptation and emission reduction finance. That hasn't occurred with the exception of 1 year, and it's been very slow to sort of build. There's a general view that this 100 billion is not adequate, and there needs to be not only an increase in the quanta of money, but also improvements in the way that it's the transparency in which it's allocated, and also I think some improvements in the way it's spent. So addressing the imbalance between emission reduction, which is the majority of money, and adaptation, which at the moment gets very little.
Professor, and carbon trading is likely to be high on the agenda as well in Baku. Talks haven't seen much progress for years on this topic, but why are they so controversial? And could we see some movement on the issue this year round?
Again, pretty hard to say because it has been stuck for quite a while. It's important to, in the carbon trading side of things, to have that balance between ease of trading, but also the reliability of the carbon credits which are being traded, and the integrity of those and the appropriateness of those in terms of not having negative impacts on the source countries. There's a long history of difficulties in this. It would be, I think, surprising if it actually did break the deadlocks and come up with some resolution. But I think it would be positive in the sense that it opens up new options for countries to both offset their emissions, but also to earn income. The critical thing here is actually getting the rules right.
Trump's win is obviously worrying international partners at the climate summit. He's called climate change a hoax, expected to withdraw U.S. again from Paris Agreement. I mean, what's the potential impact on global climate momentum? I mean, can the international community safeguard climate commitments that transcend changing U.S. administrations?
Another great question. The US really matters when it comes to climate change. It has in the past and will continue. And so what President-elect Trump has said is that not only will he potentially sort of pull out of the Paris Agreement, but also pull out of IPCC and similar institutions, and also maybe the UN Framework Convention, which is the overarching instrument there. And in particular, if we look at if the US does take a significant step backwards on climate change, it not only puts the brakes on their own emission reductions, and the US is still a major emitter. It's no longer the biggest, but it's still a major emitter, and that will have negative impacts on climate. I think the stance with the US could actually chill climate diplomacy elsewhere, so slow down those talks because of uncertainties about how the US may operate. It may also give the green light to other nations who are sitting on the fence in terms of climate action to pull back on their own activities in terms of emission reduction. And lastly, the US, in particular, the Inflation Reduction Act, has pushed forward on climate-friendly technologies and adoption. And those are things that we need to reduce our own emissions in our own countries. And so there's multiple ways in which the US change in administration may impact on the climate trajectory.
You just mentioned in our own countries. You're based in Australia, a place where experts say carbon emissions must come down, and they must come down quickly. You've said before that inaction on climate change will be more expensive than action. What's the most significant step Canberra has taken, in your opinion, to reach net zero by 2050?
Well, one of the key things here is to accept the science and accept that the science is actually incredibly robust at this point in time. And so then designing targets around that science which generate the best net benefit for people in our nation and more broadly. And at the moment, a lot of countries, including Australia, have a net zero by 2050 target. That is no longer adequate if we want to keep temperatures down to within close to 1.5 degrees, because at the moment we're going to overshoot 1.5 degrees on our current trajectories, and we could overshoot very significantly. So in Australia, the key policy that was introduced some years ago was reduction in land clearing. There was a lot of land clearing for agriculture and other purposes, and stopping that or slowing that down significantly reduced our emissions. At one stage, we did put a price on carbon here in Australia, and that significantly reduced emissions, but unfortunately was repealed by subsequent governments. At the moment, we do have a range of policies which are reasonably well integrated across industry and community, which will hopefully reduce those greenhouse gas emissions, but still questions as to about whether that reduction is fast enough.
All right, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for joining us this morning. That was Mark Howden, Director of the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions at the Australian National University. And we will bring you more climate-related coverage, including from COP29 and Baku this week. Keep with us here on CNA TV, and also follow the latest on our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app, including this article on how wars are casting a shadow on the UN-led talks.